So guys, for what we're going to go into now at the start of chapter 17 in Bruce, so this kind of gets at section 17.1, and rarely references, there's a table there at 17.1, is the acidity of an alpha hydrogen. So we'll go over what that is in a second. But let's look at just acidity of hydrogens and, that are attached to carbons in general. So if we were to look at this hydrogen right here, and, consider it to be an acidic one, is it? Well, its pKa tends to be greater than 60. Meaning, no, it's not really an acid. Because this is the conjugate base of that acid, and it is incredibly unstable. All right, so this will grab a proton from anything, meaning this is an enormously strong base, which makes this an enormously weak acid. So that's not very acidic. But what if we have this carbonyl group here? Okay, does that make things a little more acidic? And it turns out that it kind of does. This would have a pKa of anywhere from around 16 to 20. Okay, so that is much stronger an acid than ethane. And so if this were to come off, what ends up happening is we get this, because this would give its electrons over to this. And so what we're left over here is this carbanion. But there's a resonance structure that's available to it. So if these electrons were to go up here, it would kick electrons up to here. And we have this other resonance structure where we have sort of like almost an enol, where we have a double bond here. So an ethene or an alkene, and then we have this oxygen anion there. So we end up having this, and we actually shouldn't have this here. That's not part of it. Okay, so we have these two resonance structures, and that's what makes this a stronger acid. Now, if this R group, which could be a ketone or an aldehyde, were to be replaced here with an OR, making it an ester, these tend to have a higher pKa, meaning they're less acidic. And let's see why, because it seems to me, at least intuitively, that this should be more acidic, but it is not. So if we were to look at the acidity of this one here, this would have a pKa that is on the order of 25. Okay, so it is 10 to the 5 times weaker an acid. Let's start with this as the thing that ends up getting made. So here is the carbanion that results from removing this. And if it's, I'm going to use this two different color pens here. So if these electrons kick up to here and these electrons kick up to here, then this is the resonance structure that ends up being made. Okay? But there's another thing that can happen, and that is if these electrons kick over this way and these electrons kick over this way, then this ends up being, draw it a little darker, this ends up being a resonance structure. So while there are more resonance structures, this one is clearly unfavorable. And because it's unfavorable, it's less stable, which makes this a weaker acid in general. Now, we can make a much stronger version of the same thing. So if we were to have this kind of structure here, where we've got a carbonyl, a carbon, and another carbonyl, then this would have a pKa of about 9. And just to be clear, at this point, this is the alpha carbon, okay? Or at least this is one of the alpha carbon. And the alpha carbon is adjacent to a carbonyl, okay? So this is the kind of carbon we're talking about. In our previous examples here, this is an alpha carbon, and this is an alpha carbon, all because they're adjacent to our carbonyls. Okay, so that hydrogen is abstracted, and when it does, we get our carbanion, and then we get basically two different versions of the same kind of resonance structure. So there's going to be this plus a resonance structure and this plus a resonance structure. So more resonance structures increases stability and makes it a stronger acid. So that's an important point here. Okay. So the pKa for something like this is about 9. And as I had mentioned before, if we add an ester on here, the pKa for this is on the order of 10.7 or 11. So adding an ester to that weakens the acid overall. So one of the things you may be asked to do in your homework, and you are, is to rate these in terms of strongest to weakest acid. So one of these, and we'll look at number 1 here. So this is problem 5 from Bruce. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4 different things to consider here. So if we put them into groups, we have 2 esters here. And this ester is a lot like this non-ester, or this diketone. This diketone, I think, is going to be the strongest of the acids, and this is the alpha carbon that we're looking at in each case, right here. Here we've got this one that is between these 2 carbonyls, and so this will end up being our strongest. This does not have a diketone, so this will end up being our weakest. And now between these two, this has 1 ester, this has 2 esters. Esters, as we know, kind of makes these weaker acids, so this has 2 esters making it much weaker. This only has 1. So this will be our second strongest, and this will be our third. All right? So the way we should be looking at this is our strongest, next strongest, third strongest, weakest. Let's do the same for here. Now, this would be a good place to pause and try to do this yourself, and then, see how we come up. But if we were to look at these, this is like basically just a ketone. So this has a pKa of about 16. This is like a ketone with an ester, so it has a pKa on the order of 20. And this is this has just 1 alpha carbon right here, and this destabilizes it even more. This has a pKa on the order of 30. All of this you can kind of get from looking at that table on 17.1. Which means that this is our strongest, this is our second strongest, and this is our weakest. So I hope that helps you a little bit with your acidity of pKa's, and we're going to use that information as we look at how these things react moving forward.